wind was screaming across the mountain when Cade Ashworth felt it, a pull in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. He was already running before he understood why. Boots tearing through snow that came up past his knees, breath tearing out of him in white clouds that vanished as fast as they formed. Somewhere out in this storm, something was wrong. He could feel it the way he felt danger in his own blood, a warning that lived under his skin long before his mind caught up to it. 3 nights ago, his sister's den had been attacked. 3 pups, barely old enough to open their eyes, had been taken. Since then, Cade had not slept more than an hour at a time. He had sent every tracker he had into the hills, had walked the borders himself until his legs shook, had stood in his sister's empty nursery, and listened to her cry, until the sound of it became something he heard, even when she wasn't in the room. Freya had not stopped asking him the same question every single day. "Where are my babies?" And every single day, Cade had nothing to give her but silence, and a promise he was terrified he wouldn't be able to keep. Tonight the storm had rolled in fast, faster than any his pack had seen in years, burying the usual scent trails under feet of fresh snow within hours. Any other alpha might have called his men back inside, might have decided that no living thing could survive a night like this in the open mountains, might have told himself that hope had a limit, and that limit had finally been reached. Cade Ashworth was not built that way. He pressed forward instead, alone, because some instinct buried deep in the part of him that was more wolf than man refused to let him stop. The wind changed direction, and with it came a scent so faint he almost missed it. He stopped dead in the snow, chest heaving, and turned his face into the gale. There it was again, thinner than a whisper, buried under ice and pine and the metallic tang of the coming storm. Milk, fur, new life. His heart slammed against his ribs so hard it hurt. He knew that scent. He had smelled it every day since his sister's pups were born, had memorized it the way a person memorizes the sound of their own name. He moved toward it without thinking, cutting across a ridge that most men would not have dared to cross even in daylight, sliding down a slope of loose rock and snow, with a speed that would have broken lesser bones. The scent grew stronger with every step, and underneath it now was something else, something human. Warm blood beating slow and shallow, a heartbeat struggling to hold on. He found her at the base of an old pine, half buried beneath a drift that the wind had already begun to reshape into a smooth white grave. If he had come even 20 minutes later, the snow would have covered her completely, and he might have walked right past. Her hair was dark with frost, her lips a color that made something in Cade's chest tighten with fear before he could stop it. She was curled into herself, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tight around her middle, in a way that looked less like the position of someone freezing to death, and more like the position of someone protecting something precious. Cade dropped to his knees beside her, ripping off his own heavy coat and throwing it over her shoulders, before his mind had even finished processing what he was looking at. Her lips were moving, faint and broken, though no sound came out. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat and found a pulse, thin as a thread but there, stubbornly there, refusing to give up even as the cold tried to claim her. That was when he noticed her coat. It was too full, too round at the front, in a way that made no sense for a woman this thin, this frail-looking, half-frozen in a mountain storm. For one terrible second, Cade thought she might be injured, that the swelling shape beneath the fabric was some kind of wound, and his hands moved on instinct to check. What he found instead nearly stopped his heart completely. Tucked against her chest, wrapped in layers of cloth she must have torn from her own clothing, were 3 small shapes, warm, breathing, alive. 3 pups. Wolf pups, their fur still soft with the softness of the very young, pressed together in a tight knot against the woman's body, sheltered from the storm by nothing but her own failing warmth. Cade's breath caught in his throat. He knew this scent. He would know it anywhere. These were Freya's pups. The ones that had been stolen 3 nights ago. The ones he had been told by his own trackers were most likely already dead. For a moment, kneeling in the snow with the wind screaming around him, Cade Ashworth could not move at all. He simply stared, unable to fully believe what his own eyes and nose were telling him. Then instinct took over where disbelief had frozen him, and he moved faster than he had ever moved in his life. He gathered the woman and the pups together, as gently as his shaking hands would allow, cradling all 4 of them against his chest inside the folds of his coat, and he ran. He ran the way he had never run before, down slopes he would not have attempted even at his fastest pace, across ice that cracked warning beneath his boots, through wind that tried to knock him sideways with every gust. He did not stop. He could not stop. Somewhere behind his ribs, a voice that sounded like his sister kept repeating the same words over and over. Bring them home. Bring them home. Bring them home. The lights of Frostmore's main lodge appeared through the driving snow like something out of a dream, warm gold spilling from the windows onto white ground. Cade burst through the front doors, with enough force that they slammed against the walls, and the sound brought half the pack running, before he had even managed to catch his breath enough to shout. Get the healer, he managed, his voice raw from the cold and from the effort of the run. Get Freya. Now. Gareth, his second in command, was the first to reach him, and the older wolf's eyes went wide as they landed on the bundle in Cade's arms. Alpha, is that? They're alive, Cade said, and something in his own voice cracked as he said it, 3 words carrying more relief than he had felt in 3 long days. All 3 of them. Alive. The pack healer, a steady older woman named Ivy, who had delivered nearly every pup born to Frostmore in the last 20 years, was already moving before Gareth finished speaking, clearing a table near the great hearth with one sweep of her arm. Cade laid the woman down as carefully as he could, and it was only then, in the better light of the lodge, that he got his first real look at her. She could not have been older than her middle 20s. Her skin, beneath the blue tinge of the cold, was fair, and her hair, now that the frost was starting to melt from it, showed itself to be a deep brown that curled slightly at the ends. She was thin in a way that spoke of more than one hard winter, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin gone pale, her hands, when Ivy gently pried them from around the pups, raw and cracked from exposure. She was human. Cade could tell that much, even before Ivy said it aloud, her scent carrying none of the particular undertone that marked a shifter, none of the layered second nature that ran beneath a wolf's skin, even in human form. A fully human woman, alone in a mountain storm, in wolf territory, cradling 3 stolen pups against her own body, as if her life meant nothing next to theirs. Nothing about it made sense, and yet here she was. She's freezing, Ivy said, already working, wrapping the woman in warmed blankets while 2 younger pack members carried the pups to a nest of furs by the fire. Cade, I need you to step back and let me work. He did not step back. He stood exactly where he was, arms still faintly trembling from the run, and watched as his sister Freya came flying into the room, her eyes red-rimmed from days of crying, her whole body shaking as she caught sight of the small bundle of fur being settled by the hearth. The sound she made when she reached her pups and found all 3 of them breathing, all 3 of them warm, all 3 of them alive, was not a sound Cade had words for. It was relief and grief and joy all tangled together, and he found his own eyes stinging as he watched his sister gather her children against her chest for the first time in 3 days, weeping into their fur, as if she could not quite believe they were real. How? Freya whispered, looking up at her brother, with an expression somewhere between disbelief and desperate hope. Cade, how did you find them? Who is that? Cade looked over at the woman on the table, at Ivy, working quickly to check her breathing, her heartbeat, the state of her frostbitten fingers, and he realized he had absolutely no answer to give. I don't know, he admitted quietly. I found her in the snow. She had them wrapped inside her own coat. She was keeping them warm with her own body. He paused, the full weight of what that meant settling over him slowly, like snow itself, layer after layer. She was dying to keep them alive. The room went quiet, except for the crackle of the fire, and Freya's soft crying, as she rocked her pups against her chest. Every wolf in that hall understood, in that moment, exactly what they were looking at. A stranger, a human stranger, with no reason at all to care about wolves that were not her own, who had chosen to freeze rather than let 3 small lives slip away in the storm. Ivy worked over the woman for what felt like a very long time, checking her pulse again and again, rubbing warmth back into her limbs, forcing small sips of warmed broth between her cracked lips whenever she stirred enough to swallow. Cade did not leave the room. He told himself it was only because he needed answers, because a human woman carrying his nephew and nieces out of a blizzard was a mystery that demanded an explanation before he could rest. He told himself that was the only reason his eyes kept returning to her face, to the slow rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets, to the small furrow of pain that crossed her brow, even in whatever half-conscious state she had sunk into. He told himself a great many things that night, standing by the fire with his sister's pups finally safe and warm a few feet away, and very few of those things turned out to be entirely true. Near midnight, the woman's eyes finally opened. They were a pale shade of gray-green, unfocused at first, drifting slowly across the unfamiliar room, the unfamiliar faces, the fire, the furs. Panic flickered through them almost immediately, her body trying to jerk upright, before Ivy's steady hand pressed her gently back down. "Easy," Ivy said, her voice calm and practiced, the voice of a woman who had talked frightened creatures through worse moments than this one. "You are safe. You are among friends. No one here means you any harm." The woman's gaze darted around the room until it landed, with sudden desperate urgency, on the small nest of furs by the hearth where the 3 pups lay sleeping against their mother's side. Something in her whole body seemed to loosen at the sight of them, the tension bleeding out of her shoulders in one long exhale. "They're safe," Cade said, stepping closer, keeping his voice as gentle as he could make it. "All 3 of them. Because of you." Her eyes found his then, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. There was something in her expression that Cade could not quite name, not fear exactly, though there was a thread of that too, but something older and heavier sitting underneath it, something that looked almost like disbelief, that she had survived the night at all. "Who are you?" Cade asked, kneeling down beside the table, so that he was not looming over her. "How did you find them? Where did you come from?" The woman opened her mouth as if to answer, and then her brow creased, confusion sweeping across her pale features. She lifted a shaking hand to her temple, pressing her fingers there as though trying to physically push a memory back into place. "I don't," she started, her voice a raw whisper, cracked from cold and disuse. "I don't remember." Cade felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with the storm still raging outside the walls. "You don't remember how you found the pups?" "I don't remember anything," she said, and there was real fear in her voice now, rising with every word. "Before the snow. Before I woke up here. There's nothing. Just cold and running. And I knew I had to keep them warm. I knew that, more than I knew anything else. But I don't know why. I don't know who I am. I don't." Her breath hitched, panic building fast, and Ivy moved quickly to press a warm cup into her shaking hands. "Drink," Ivy said firmly. "Breathe. Your body has been through more than most people survive. Your mind needs time to catch up. It will come back to you. Answers do not have to arrive tonight." The woman drank with trembling hands, but her eyes stayed fixed on Cade, wide and lost and searching, as though she thought he might have the answers she could not find in herself. "What's your name?" Cade asked quietly. "Do you remember that, at least?" She was silent for a long moment, staring down into the cup in her hands. Then, so softly he almost missed it over the crackle of the fire, she said, "Ren. I think my name is Ren." It was such a small thing, one word, one fragment pulled up out of whatever darkness had swallowed the rest of her memory, and yet Cade felt something shift in his chest at the sound of it, as though the name itself mattered more than it should have, to a man who had known this woman for less than an hour. "Ren," he repeated, testing the shape of it. "You saved 3 lives tonight, Ren. Lives that mean everything to my family. Whatever else you don't remember, I want you to know that. You are not among strangers here. You are among people who owe you a debt that cannot be repaid." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the beginning of relief. But before she could respond, her eyelids grew heavy again, exhaustion and cold finally winning the battle her body had been fighting all night. Ivy caught the cup as it slipped from her fingers, easing her back down onto the furs. "Let her rest," Ivy said, glancing up at Cade with an expression he had seen on her face only a handful of times before, usually when something important was about to change. "Whatever she is, whoever she was before tonight, her body needs time to heal before her mind can do the same." Cade nodded, but he did not move from his place beside the table. He sat there long after Ren had drifted back into sleep, long after Freya had carried her pups off to a quieter room to nurse them and finally rest herself, long after the fire had burned down to embers and most of the pack had gone back to their own beds. He sat there and watched the slow rise and fall of a stranger's breathing, and he found himself thinking, with a certainty he could not fully explain, that whoever this woman turned out to be, whatever secrets had led her into that storm carrying 3 pups against her own freezing body, Frostmore's future had just changed forever. Outside, the storm raged on through the darkest hours of the night, snow piling higher against the lodge walls, wind howling over the mountains like something searching for what it had lost. But inside, by the dying light of the fire, 3 pups slept safely in their mother's arms, and a woman who did not yet know her own past slept in the warmth she had almost died to give away. Cade Ashworth watched over her until dawn broke pale and gold across the snow, and he made himself a silent promise before the sun had even fully risen. Whatever had happened to Wren before that storm, whatever danger might still be hunting her, whatever answers her broken memory was hiding from her, he would find them. And whatever it cost him, he would make sure that nothing ever hurt her again. He had no way of knowing, in that quiet gray morning, just how much that promise would come to demand of him, or how deeply his own fate had already become tangled with hers the moment he pulled her out of the snow. Morning came slow and silver over Frostmore, the storm finally breaking into a soft, steady snowfall that dusted the pine trees outside the lodge windows like powdered sugar. Cade had not slept. He sat in the same chair beside the hearth where he had spent the whole night, his eyes tracking the rise and fall of Wren's chest beneath the furs, cataloging every small movement, every flicker of expression that crossed her sleeping face. He told himself he was simply being cautious. A stranger who appeared out of nowhere carrying his family's stolen pups deserved careful watching, regardless of the debt he already felt toward her. That was the reasonable explanation, the Alpha's explanation, and he clung to it, because the alternative, that he simply could not make himself look away from her, was not something he was ready to examine. Gareth found him there just after sunrise, 2 cups of something hot steaming in his hands. He passed one to Cade without a word, and settled into the chair across from him, his gaze moving between his Alpha's exhausted face and the sleeping woman on the table. "You should rest," Gareth said finally. "You have been awake for 3 days straight, and last night nearly killed you along with her." "I'm fine," Cade said, which was not entirely true, and both of them knew it. Gareth studied him for a long moment, the kind of look that came from 20 years of friendship and an equal number of years watching Cade shoulder more than any one wolf should have to carry alone. "The whole pack is talking about her already," he said. "A human woman, alone in a blizzard, carrying 3 wolf pups against her own body. They are calling it a miracle." "It might be," Cade admitted. "Or it might be something else," Gareth said, his voice dropping lower, more careful. "Cade, I am glad the pups are alive. I am more grateful than I can say. But we do not know who this woman is. We do not know where she came from, or why she was anywhere near our territory in the first place, so close to where the pups were taken. It could be exactly what it looks like. It could also be something far more complicated." Cade's jaw tightened, but he did not argue, because some quiet, cautious part of him had already turned the same thought over more than once during the long hours of the night. It was too strange, too convenient, for a human woman to simply stumble upon 3 stolen pups in the middle of a raging storm, in the exact stretch of mountain where those pups had vanished 3 nights before. Coincidences that large made careful men suspicious, and Cade Ashworth had not survived as Alpha of Frostmore by ignoring his instincts. And yet, he looked at her face, pale and still healing, at the raw, cracked skin of her hands where she had held those pups against her own body, until her fingers nearly froze solid, and he could not make the suspicion sit easily beside what his own eyes had witnessed. Whatever her reasons, whatever secrets lay buried beneath the blank wall of her missing memory, no one faked the kind of sacrifice he had found her making in that snowdrift. No one accidentally nearly died, protecting 3 lives that were not their own. "We will find out the truth," Cade said at last, "but we will do it carefully. And until we know more, she is under my protection. No one touches her, no one questions her without me present, and no one speaks a word of suspicion where she or the pack can hear it. Is that understood?" Gareth held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood, Alpha. I only ask that you protect yourself as carefully as you intend to protect her." Cade did not answer that, because he was not entirely sure he could make that particular promise, not when something in his chest had already begun to shift the moment he'd found her in the snow, holding 3 small lives against her own failing heartbeat, refusing to let go, even as the cold tried to take everything from her. By midday, Ren woke again, this time with more clarity in her eyes, though the fear had not entirely left her. She managed to sit up on her own, wincing at the ache in her frostbitten fingers, and accepted the bowl of warm broth Ivy brought her with a small, uncertain word of thanks. Freya came in not long after, the 3 pups nestled against her chest, and the moment Ren's eyes landed on them, something in her whole posture eased, as though some part of her, some instinct deeper than memory, needed to see with her own eyes that they were truly safe. "They are doing wonderfully," Freya said softly, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Because of you. I don't know how to thank you enough. I don't even know your full story, and already I owe you everything." Ren's throat worked as she looked at the pups, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with something that sounded almost like grief. "I don't remember much," she admitted. "But I remember knowing that they had to be warm, that nothing else mattered as much as that. I don't know why I knew it so clearly. I just did." "Maybe some things live deeper than memory," Freya said gently. "Maybe your heart remembered what your mind couldn't hold on to." Cade, standing quietly near the doorway, watched this exchange with a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with suspicion, and everything to do with the way Ren's eyes filled with unshed tears as she reached out one careful bandaged finger to stroke the smallest pup's fur. Whatever this woman had lost, whatever darkness sat behind the wall in her mind, there was nothing false in the way she looked at those 3 small lives. Nothing false at all. He did not yet know how much more there was to learn, how deep the roots of her hidden past truly ran, or how directly they connected to the very enemy who had stolen his sister's pups in the first place. He knew only that the mystery of Ren was far from finished unfolding, and that whatever answers waited on the other side of her broken memory, he intended to be standing beside her when they finally came. 3 days passed before Ren was strong enough to leave the bed Ivy had claimed for her recovery, and in that time, Frostmore Lodge had quietly become divided into 2 kinds of people. There were those who looked at her with open gratitude, who left small gifts of dried herbs and warm socks outside her door, who whispered about the miracle of the woman in the snow whenever she passed. And there were those, fewer in number but no less watchful, who kept their distance and their opinions guarded, waiting to see what the Alpha would decide before they made up their own minds about the stranger sleeping under their roof. Cade found himself caught somewhere between both groups, though he would not have admitted it easily. Gratitude sat heavy and warm in his chest every time he thought of his sister's pups, safe and thriving because of a woman who had nearly died to keep them that way. But questions gnawed at him just as persistently, questions that grew sharper rather than softer as the days passed, and Ren's memory remained a locked door she could not open. He visited her each morning, ostensibly to check on her recovery, though he suspected Ivy saw through the excuse from the very first day. Ren was healing quickly for someone who had come so close to the edge of death. Her color had returned, the raw cracks in her hands were closing under Ivy's careful treatments, and the haunted look in her eyes had begun, slowly, to give way to something calmer, though never quite peaceful. "Any dreams?" Cade asked one morning, settling into the chair across from her while she sat wrapped in blankets near the window, watching snow drift down over the pine trees outside. Ren considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things now, as though she had learned to distrust the easy answer. "Fragments," she said finally. "Nothing that makes sense yet. Sometimes I see a hallway, long and dark, with doors on either side. Sometimes I hear voices, but I can never make out the words. And sometimes—" She hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around the mug of tea in her hands. "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes I feel afraid before I even know why," she admitted quietly. "Like my body remembers being afraid of something, even though my mind can't tell me what it was." Cade felt his jaw tighten at that, an old protective instinct rising in him faster than he could reason it away. "Are you afraid now?" he asked. "Here, with us?" She looked at him then, really looked, her pale eyes searching his face for a long moment before she answered. "No," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, simple and certain, that settled something uneasy in Cade's chest. "I don't understand why, given how little I know about any of you, but I don't feel afraid here. If anything, this is the first place since I woke up that has felt safe." The word safe hung between them for a moment, quiet and heavy, with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name aloud. Cade cleared his throat and looked away first, busying himself with pouring more tea from the pot Ivy had left, though his hands were steadier than his thoughts. Ivy, who had been quietly working at a table nearby, sorting dried herbs into small jars, spoke up without looking up from her task. "I have been thinking about her condition," she said. "It troubles me more the longer I consider it." "What do you mean?" Cade asked. "A person does not simply lose their memory from cold and exhaustion," Ivy said, setting down the jar in her hands and turning to face them both. "The body can certainly suffer confusion, disorientation, even periods of blacking out, but this, a complete wall around everything before the storm, while her mind functions perfectly clearly in every other way, that is not typical of frostbite or hunger, however severe." Wren's grip on her mug tightened further. "Then what is it?" Ivy studied her carefully, the same careful, searching look she gave to wounds that did not behave the way wounds should. "I have seen this kind of memory loss only twice before, in all my years healing this pack," she said slowly. "Both times, it followed an injury to the head, severe enough to be considered dangerous. And both times, it was accompanied by something else." "What?" Cade asked, leaning forward. "Old scars," Ivy said. "Marks that suggested the memory loss was not the first injury that person had suffered, that there was a pattern of harm stretching back further than anyone around them realized." Her eyes moved, deliberately, to Wren's wrists, where the sleeves of her borrowed shirt had slipped down slightly, revealing pale lines of old scarring that Cade had noticed before, but had not allowed himself to examine too closely, out of respect for whatever privacy the woman had left. Wren followed her gaze down to her own wrist, and her expression shifted into something Cade had not seen from her before. Not confusion this time, but a flicker of genuine fear, quickly suppressed. "I don't remember how I got these," she said quietly, pulling her sleeve back down with a movement that seemed almost automatic, practiced, as though hiding those marks was a habit older than her memory itself. "I noticed them, the first morning I woke up here. I didn't know what to make of them." "May I look more closely?" Ivy asked gently. "It might help me understand what we are truly dealing with." Wren hesitated only a moment before nodding, extending her arm across the small table. Ivy examined the marks with the careful, clinical attention of someone who had spent decades reading injuries like other people read books, turning Wren's wrist gently in the light from the window. "These are old," Ivy murmured, half to herself. "Years old, some of them. And this pattern here." She traced a line of small, evenly spaced scars near the inside of the wrist. "This is not accidental. This was done deliberately, and more than once." The room went very still. Cade felt something cold settle in his stomach, a suspicion forming that he did not want to voice, not yet, not until he had more than fragments to build it on. "Someone hurt you," he said quietly. "Before the storm, before all of this. Someone hurt you for a long time." Wren stared down at her own wrist as though seeing it for the first time, her breathing gone shallow and quick. "I don't remember," she whispered, and there was real distress in her voice now, rising fast. "I don't remember any of it, but looking at that, I believe you. I believe something happened to me. Something bad. Something that lasted a long time." She looked up, and her eyes were wet, though she blinked hard against the tears. "Why can't I remember? Why would my own mind hide something like that from me?" "Sometimes," Ivy said softly, setting her wrist down with great gentleness. "The mind protects itself the only way it knows how. It is not unkind, what your memory has done. It may simply be waiting until you are strong enough to carry the weight of what it is hiding." Cade watched Wren struggle to compose herself, watched the way her hands trembled slightly even as she tried to still them, and something in his chest twisted painfully at the sight. Whatever suspicion he had allowed himself to entertain about her arrival, about the strange convenience of her appearance so near the place where his sister's pups had been stolen, it felt suddenly small and unworthy set against the reality sitting in front of him. This was not a woman playing some careful game. This was a woman, carrying wounds so deep her own mind had buried them, rather than let her face them all at once. "You don't have to figure it out today," Cade said, his voice gentler than he had intended, gentler than he usually allowed himself to be with anyone outside his own family. "You don't have to figure it out at all, if it's too much. You're safe here. Whatever happened before, whoever hurt you, They have no reach here. I promise you that. Ren looked up at him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Something passed between them in that silence. Something Cade could not have named even if he had tried. A kind of recognition that went deeper than the short handful of days they had known each other. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand why a stranger would make me a promise like that, but thank you." "You're not a stranger," Cade said. "Not anymore. Not after what you did for my family." Later that afternoon, while Ren rested and Ivy continued her careful notes on the strange nature of the memory loss, Cade found himself standing outside, near the training yard, watching a group of young pack members practice their forms in the cold air, his mind turning over everything he had learned. Old scars, deliberate marks, a pattern of harm stretching back years, a woman who appeared out of nowhere in the exact stretch of territory where his sister's pups had vanished, carrying them to safety at the cost of nearly her own life. The pieces did not fit together cleanly yet, but Cade had led his pack long enough to trust the shape of a puzzle, even before he could see every piece. Something connected Ren's past to the raid on his sister's den. He could feel it the way he felt weather changing, before the sky itself gave any sign, a certainty that lived beneath conscious thought. Gareth found him there a while later, his expression carefully neutral in the way it always was when he had something difficult to say. "The council wants to speak with you," he said. "About her." "What about her?" "Some of the elders are uneasy," Gareth said. "A human woman, healing under our protection, with no memory and no explanation for how she found herself so precisely in the right place at the right time. They want to know your plans for her, whether she stays, whether she is questioned more formally, whether she poses any risk to the pack." Cade's jaw tightened, old frustration flaring at the idea of his own people treating Ren with suspicion after what she had sacrificed. But he forced himself to breathe through it, to remember that caution had kept Frostmore alive and strong for generations, and that the elders' concern, however unwelcome, was not without reason. "Tell them I will speak with them tonight," Cade said. "And tell them this: whatever questions they have, they will be answered with patience and respect. That woman held my nephew and nieces against her own body until she nearly froze to death protecting them. She will not be treated as a criminal in my hall while she cannot even remember her own name." Gareth nodded slowly, though something in his expression suggested he had more to say, and had chosen, for now, to hold his tongue. "There is one more thing," he said instead. "One of the trackers found something this morning, out near the ridge where you found her. Something that might interest you." "What?" "Footprints," Gareth said. "Old ones, mostly buried by the storm, but enough remained to make out a shape. Boot prints, heavy ones, several sets, moving away from that ridge in the days before you found her. Not pack prints, not anyone's boots we recognize." A cold, sharp feeling moved through Cade's chest, sharper than the mountain wind outside. "Someone else was there," he said slowly. "Before I found her. Someone was tracking that ridge in the days leading up to the storm." "It would seem so," Gareth said grimly. "Which means either Ren was being followed when she reached our territory, or she was fleeing something specific, and whoever was chasing her may still be out there, somewhere beyond our borders, waiting." Cade looked out over the training yard, over the pack he had sworn his life to protect, and felt the shape of the coming danger settle over him like a physical weight. Whatever secrets Ren's memory was hiding, whatever past had marked her wrists with old scars, and left her running through a blizzard with 3 stolen pups against her chest, it had not ended the night he pulled her out of the snow. It had only followed her here, quietly, patiently, waiting in the dark beyond Frostmore's borders for its chance to finish what it had started. And Cade Ashworth intended to make absolutely certain that chance never came. The council meeting that night was tense, in a way Cade had not experienced in years. 6 elders sat around the long table in the meeting hall, their faces lit gold and shadow by the fire, and though none of them spoke against Ren directly, their questions carried the weight of doubt underneath every careful word. Cade answered each one with patience he did not entirely feel, laying out everything he knew. The pups found safe, the memory loss Ivy could not fully explain, the old scars on her wrists, and now, the unfamiliar boot prints found near the ridge. "If someone was tracking her," said Elder Corwin, the oldest among them, his voice raspy with age but sharp with concern, "then we have not simply taken in a wounded stranger. We may have taken in a target, and whoever hunts her, may not stop, simply because she has crossed into our territory. I am aware of that, Cade said evenly, which is precisely why I intend to keep her here, under close watch, until we understand the nature of the threat. Turning her out into the cold a second time helps no one, least of all this pack. And if the danger follows her here? Asked another elder, a sharp-eyed woman named Marta. If whoever left those tracks decides Frostmoor is worth attacking, to reclaim what they lost. Cade held her gaze steadily. Then we will be ready for them, as we always have been. He let a beat of silence pass before adding, more quietly, she saved 3 of our own, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. If this pack cannot find the courage to protect one wounded woman in return, then we do not deserve the loyalty we ask of every wolf who calls Frostmoor home. The room fell silent at that, and though a few of the elders still exchanged uncertain glances, no one raised further objection. The meeting ended with a fragile agreement. Wren would remain, under Cade's personal protection, while the pack quietly strengthened its border watches and kept careful record of anything unusual near the mountain's edges. Cade left the meeting hall well past midnight, his mind heavy with everything unresolved, and found himself walking not toward his own quarters but toward the healing room, where Wren still slept. He told himself he only meant to check that all was well, that the tension of the council meeting had left him restless and in need of reassurance that nothing had happened in his absence. He found her awake instead, sitting up near the low fire, one of the pups cradled carefully against her chest, while Freya dozed nearby, with the other 2 curled at her side. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly, not wanting to wake the others. "He wouldn't settle," Wren whispered, glancing down at the small pup tucked against her. "And I found I didn't mind staying up with him." She looked up at Cade, taking in the tension still visible in his shoulders despite his attempt to hide it. "Bad meeting?" "Complicated," Cade admitted, settling into the chair across from her. "The elders are cautious. It is their nature and their duty. I do not blame them for it, even when it frustrates me. They're afraid I'll bring danger to your pack," Wren said, not as a question. It was clear, watching her face in the firelight, that she had already guessed as much on her own, and the thought seemed to weigh on her more heavily than Cade would have expected. "They're being careful," Cade said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Wren asked softly, looking down at the pup sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Cade, I don't know who I was before that storm. I don't know what I might have done, or what might be chasing me because of it. What if they're right to be careful? What if I brought something dangerous to your door without even knowing it?" Cade leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and studied her for a long moment before answering. "Whatever you were before, whatever you might have done, I watched you nearly die keeping 3 lives safe that weren't your own. That tells me more about who you are than any memory could. The rest, whoever might be looking for you, whatever danger follows, we will face it together. You are not facing it alone, not while you are under my protection." Something in Wren's expression softened at that, though a shadow of worry still lingered behind her eyes. "You barely know me," she said quietly. "Why would you promise something like that?" Cade considered the question seriously, the fire crackling softly between them, the pup in Wren's arms shifting slightly in his sleep. "I have led this pack since I was young," he said finally. "I have made a great many promises in that time, most of them out of duty. This one is different. I am not entirely sure why, but it does not feel like duty. It feels like something I would make even if I were not alpha of anything at all." Wren's breath caught slightly at that, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything more, the silence between them filled with something neither was quite ready to name. 3 days later, the quiet peace of that fragile understanding was shattered. A tracker returned from the northern border at a dead run, breathless, his eyes wide with alarm. Cade met him in the training yard, and the news he brought settled like ice in every listener's chest. "Scent markers," the tracker gasped, "along the northern ridge. Fresh ones, not ours. Deliberately placed, alpha, like a warning, or a claim." "Show me," Cade said, already moving. He took Gareth and 3 of his strongest warriors, leaving strict instructions that the lodge be watched closely in his absence, and together they made their way through the snow to the northern ridge where the tracker had found the marks. What they found there made Cade's blood run cold. Carved into the bark of an old pine tree, deep enough to show clearly even beneath a fresh dusting of snow, was a symbol Cade recognized immediately. A jagged, broken circle, the mark of Hollow Fang, the rival pack that had haunted the Northern Territories for years, with a reputation for cruelty that even other predators avoided crossing. Beneath the symbol, pressed into the snow with deliberate care, was a single scrap of fabric, torn and stained, tied around a small bundle of dark fur. Gareth crouched to examine it and went very still. "Alpha," he said quietly, "this is pup fur. Recently cut. And this fabric." He held it up carefully, his expression grim. "This matches the description of the clothing Wren was found wearing. Torn from the same garment, unless I am very much mistaken." Cade felt something cold and furious settle over him, a clarity of purpose sharpening every thought in his mind. "They know she's here," he said. "They know the pups are here. This is a message." "What message?" one of the younger warriors asked. "That they have not given up," Cade said grimly, staring at the broken circle carved into the tree. "That whatever Wren escaped from, whoever hunted her through that storm, they have found the trail again. And they want us to know it." The warriors exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the discovery settling heavily over the group. Gareth straightened, tucking the scrap of fabric carefully into his coat, as evidence to bring back to the lodge. "What are your orders, Alpha?" Cade looked north, past the ridge, toward the distant dark line of forest where Hollow Fang's territory was rumored to begin, and felt every protective instinct in his body sharpen into something hard and unyielding. "Double the border watches," he said. "Every path, every ridge, every trail leading toward the lodge. No one enters or leaves without being seen, and Wren does not leave the lodge grounds unaccompanied, not for any reason, until we understand exactly what we are dealing with." "And the pups?" Gareth asked. "Freya's rooms moved to the inner chambers tonight," Cade said. "Furthest from any outer wall. I want warriors posted outside her door at all hours." He paused, his jaw tightening as the full weight of the discovery settled over him. Whatever Hollow Fang wants with Wren, whatever history exists between them, they will not get close enough to take her, or the pups, ever again. I will make certain of that myself. They returned to the lodge as the sun began sinking low behind the mountains, painting the snow in shades of deep orange and violet, and Cade found himself dreading the conversation he now had to have. He found Wren in the small garden room where she had taken to spending her afternoons, watching birds gather at a feeder near the frosted window, a soft blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up as he entered, and something in his expression must have given away the seriousness of what he carried, because her own face shifted immediately into careful alertness. "What happened?" Cade sat down across from her and, as gently as he could, explained what the trackers had found: the mark of Hollow Fang, the pup fur, the torn scrap of fabric that matched her own clothing. He watched her face carefully as he spoke, watched the color drain slowly from her cheeks, watched her hands begin to tremble in her lap. "Hollow Fang," she whispered, and something about the way the name left her lips, low and strangled, told Cade immediately that some deep, wordless part of her recognized it, even if her conscious memory could not yet place why. "Does that name mean something to you?" Cade asked carefully. Wren pressed a hand to her chest, her breathing gone quick and shallow, her eyes distant and unfocused in a way that reminded Cade uncomfortably of the state Ivy had described from her first night in the lodge. "I don't know," she said, her voice tight with rising panic. "I don't remember anything specific, but hearing it, Cade, hearing that name, makes me feel like I can't breathe, like something terrible is standing right behind me, and I can't turn around to see it." Cade moved without thinking, closing the distance between them and taking her trembling hands gently in his own. "You're safe," he said firmly, holding her gaze until some of the wild panic in her eyes began to settle. "Whatever that name means, whatever it did to you, it cannot reach you here. I promise you that. I will not let it." Wren's breathing slowly steadied, though her hands remained tight around his, as though she needed the anchor of his touch to keep the panic from swallowing her whole. "I'm starting to remember things," she admitted quietly, once she could speak again, not clearly. "Just flashes. A cage. Voices arguing above me. The smell of blood and fear so strong it made me sick." Her eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. "I think something very bad happened to me at the hands of whoever that mark belongs to. I think I have been running from it for a very long time, longer than just this storm." Cade felt fury rise in his chest, hot and sharp. directed at an enemy he had not yet fully identified, but already hated with every fiber of his being. Whatever Hollowfang had done to this woman, whatever cruelty had left those scars on her wrists and that wall around her memory, he intended to make certain it never touched her again. "We will find out the truth," he said quietly, echoing the same promise he had made days before, though it felt heavier now, more urgent, carrying the weight of a threat that had moved from possibility into certainty. "And when we do, whatever they want from you, whatever claim they believe they have, they will learn that Frostmoor does not surrender what belongs under its protection. Not while I am Alpha. Not ever." Ren looked up at him, her pale eyes bright with unshed tears, and something else, something that looked almost like hope, daring to take root, despite everything working against it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing me, for believing in me, when I can't even remember enough to explain myself properly." "You don't need to explain yourself," Cade said softly. "I have seen enough of who you are already. The rest, we will uncover together." Outside, the last light of day faded behind the mountains, and somewhere beyond Frostmoor's borders, in the dark heart of Hollowfang's territory, the enemy that had marked that tree and left that message was already making its next move. Cade Ashworth did not yet know the full shape of the danger closing in around them, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that the fragile peace of the past few days was over, and that whatever came next would test the strength of his pack, the depth of his promise, and the growing bond forming between himself and the woman who had walked out of a blizzard carrying 3 impossible miracles against her heart. 2 mornings after the discovery on the northern ridge, one of Frostmoor's border patrols caught a stranger attempting to slip past the outer watch line. He was young, lean, and clearly not a pack member, dressed in dark, worn clothing, meant for blending into shadow rather than surviving the cold. And when the patrol brought him before Cade in the Great Hall, the young man's eyes were sharp with a kind of practiced defiance that told Cade immediately he had done this sort of work before. "Caught him near the Eastern Trail," said the patrol leader, a solid warrior named Dorian, keeping a firm grip on the stranger's arm. He was moving carefully, staying low, avoiding the main paths. If young Marisol hadn't caught his scent on the wind, he might have slipped past us entirely. Cade studied the stranger for a long moment, taking in the deliberate way he held himself, neither cowering nor struggling, simply waiting, with the patient stillness of someone confident that panic would not help his situation. "What is your business on Frostmoor land?" Cade asked, his voice carrying the low, dangerous calm that every wolf in the hall recognized as far more threatening than any shout. The stranger's eyes flicked briefly toward the doorway, where Ren had just entered, drawn by the commotion, her face going pale the instant her gaze landed on the captured man. Something passed across the stranger's expression at the sight of her, recognition, and something colder underneath it, something that looked almost like satisfaction. "You," the stranger said softly, his lips curling into a thin smile. "So the rumors were true. She really did run all the way here." Ren's whole body went rigid. Cade watched her hands ball into fists at her sides, watched the color drain further from her already pale face, and felt every protective instinct in his body sharpen to a razor's edge. "You know her," Cade said, stepping deliberately between Ren and the captured stranger, blocking his view of her entirely. "Everyone in Hollowfang knows her," the stranger said, and there was a cruelty in the way he said it, casual and practiced, the tone of someone entirely comfortable with causing pain. "Draven's favorite little caretaker, though I suppose she's forgotten all of that, hasn't she?" I heard the fall scrambled her memory rather thoroughly. Behind Cade, Ren made a small, strangled sound, and he heard Freya move quickly to her side, wrapping a supportive arm around her shoulders. "Explain yourself," Cade said, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. "Now, or I promise you, the cold outside these walls will feel merciful, compared to what happens if you continue wasting my patience." The stranger's confident smile faltered slightly under the weight of Cade's stare, though he did not entirely lose his composure. "She was taken as a child," he said finally, his tone shifting into something more careful, more calculating, as though he had decided that information might buy him more safety than defiance. "Years ago, raised within Hollowfang's walls to care for stolen young. Pups meant for trade, for ransom, sometimes for worse purposes I won't speak of in polite company. She was good at it, gentle with them, in a way most of us were not permitted to be. Draven kept her close because of it." Cade felt something cold and furious settle over him as the pieces began, finally, to click into place. She was a prisoner, he said. Not a member of your pack by choice. Choice was never really part of the arrangement, the stranger said with a shrug that made Cade's hands curl into fists. She served her purpose, until 3 nights ago, when your sister's pups went missing during our raid, and somehow, in all the chaos, our caretaker vanished right along with them. His eyes moved past Cade, back toward Ren, something almost admiring flickering across his expression despite the coldness underneath. Took quite a risk, running off into that storm with 3 infants she had no real claim to. Draven was furious. He does not take well to losing what belongs to him. She belongs to no one, Cade said, his voice a low growl that made even the confident stranger flinch back slightly. Not to you, not to your alpha, not to anyone who would use a child for their own cruel purposes, and then hunt her through a blizzard when she dared to choose kindness over obedience. The stranger said nothing to that, though something in his eyes suggested he understood, on some level, exactly how deep the wrongness of what he was describing truly ran. Cade turned to Dorian. Take him to the holding cell. He will remain there, comfortable but secure, until we decide what is to be done with him. No harm comes to him unless he attempts to escape or endanger this pack, but he does not leave until I say so. Dorian nodded and led the stranger away, leaving a heavy silence behind in the great hall. Cade turned immediately to Ren, whose face had gone entirely white, her breathing shallow and quick, her eyes distant with the particular blankness that came just before a memory broke through the wall her own mind had built to protect her. Ren, he said gently, moving to kneel in front of her chair. Look at me. You are safe. Whatever he said, whatever is true, none of it changes what you did, or who you are now. A caretaker, Ren whispered, staring somewhere past his shoulder, her voice trembling. I was raised to care for stolen children. Cade, that means I have done this before. I have held pups that weren't mine before, comforted them, kept them warm, all so they could be sold or traded or worse, and I never once. Her voice broke entirely, tears finally spilling over. I never once tried to save any of them before. Why? Why did I finally run, this time, when I hadn't before? Freya, still holding her shoulders, spoke softly. Perhaps you tried before and could not succeed. Perhaps this time, something in you simply refused to fail again. Ren shook her head, pressing her hands against her eyes, as though she could physically hold back the flood of memory threatening to break through. I remember now, she whispered. Pieces of it. A hallway of small cages. So many of them. I remember singing to frightened pups in the dark, trying to comfort them the only way I could, knowing I had no power to free them, only to make their suffering slightly less cruel while it lasted. Her whole body shook with the force of what she was recalling. And I remember the night of the raid. The chaos. The fighting. Someone shouted that the pups meant for Draven's newest trade had been taken by mistake in the confusion, and I saw my chance. And I took it. And I ran. And I did not look back even once, because I could not bear to fail them the way I had failed so many others before. The room had gone entirely silent, every wolf present listening in stunned, heavy stillness to the horror unfolding in Ren's broken words. Cade reached out and gently took her hands, holding them steady in his own, grounding her against the storm of memory crashing through her all at once. You didn't fail anyone, he said firmly. You saved 3 lives at the cost of nearly your own. Whatever happened before, however many times you could not act, this time you did, and it changed everything. That is not failure, Ren. That is the bravest thing I have ever witnessed in my life. Ren looked up at him, tears streaming freely down her face now, and something in her expression cracked open entirely. Years of buried grief and fear finally finding a place safe enough to break the surface. I don't know how to be anything other than what they made me, she whispered. I don't know if there is a version of me that exists outside of what Hollowfang built. There is, Cade said, with a certainty that came from somewhere deep and unshakable inside him. I have already met her. She is sitting right in front of me, brave enough to run through a blizzard rather than let 3 innocent lives be traded away like property. Whatever Hollowfang tried to make you, Ren, they failed. You are proof of that. Standing here, alive, having chosen kindness even when it nearly killed you. Freya knelt down beside them both, taking one of Ren's hands in her own free one, her eyes wet with her own tears. "My children are alive because of the woman you actually are," she said softly, "not the one anyone else tried to force you to become. I will spend the rest of my life grateful for that truth, and I will make certain my children grow up knowing exactly who saved them." Ren wept quietly for a long while after that, surrounded by people who had known her for only days, but who had already chosen, without hesitation, to stand firmly on her side of whatever battle was coming. Cade remained kneeling beside her the entire time, her hands held steady in his own, and though neither of them spoke of it directly, something had shifted permanently between them in that hall, a bond forged not from convenience or gratitude alone, but from the raw, unguarded truth of who Ren truly was, beneath every layer of stolen memory and inflicted pain. Later that evening, once Ren had finally cried herself into an exhausted, dreamless sleep, Cade found Gareth waiting for him, near the entrance to the holding cells, his expression grim. "The prisoner has been talking," Gareth said quietly. "Not much, but enough. It seems Hollow Fang's alpha, this Draven Voss, does not consider Ren merely a runaway caretaker. He considers her a symbol, proof that even those he raises from childhood can slip his control if given the chance. Word is, he cannot allow that story to spread among his own people. He needs her returned, made an example of, or the fear that keeps his pack obedient will begin to crack." Cade felt the full weight of that information settle heavily over him. This was no longer simply a matter of protecting a woman who had wandered, by chance, into danger. This was a matter of protecting someone who had become, in her escape, a direct threat to the foundation of a cruel and powerful enemy's authority. Draven Voss would not simply let her go. He could not without risking everything he had built. "Then we prepare for more than scouts and warnings," Cade said quietly, staring out the frosted window toward the dark line of mountains, separating Frostmoor from Hollow Fang's territory. "We prepare for war, if it comes to that. Because I promise you, Gareth, they will have to go through me and every warrior loyal to this pack before they ever lay a hand on her again." Gareth studied his alpha for a long moment, something like understanding, and perhaps even quiet approval, settling into his expression. "Then we had best begin preparing tonight," he said. "Because if what the prisoner says is true, Draven Voss does not wait long once he has made a decision. And I suspect that decision was made the moment he learned exactly where his lost caretaker had found shelter." Outside, the mountain wind picked up again, carrying with it the distant promise of another storm, though this time, Cade knew, the danger gathering on the horizon would not be one that snow and ice alone could summon or dispel. In the days that followed, Frostmoor transformed around Ren, without her quite realizing how much of that change centered on her presence. Warriors who had once eyed her with quiet suspicion now nodded to her in the halls, some even pausing to thank her directly for what she had done for Freya's pups. The elders, though still cautious, softened their stance considerably once word spread of what Hollow Fang had done to her as a child, the cruelty of it settling uneasily over even the most guarded hearts in the pack. And the pups themselves, now old enough to crawl and babble and reach for anything within grasp, had developed an attachment to Ren that no one, least of all Ren, quite knew what to do with. She spent her mornings in the nursery with Freya now, a routine that had formed naturally rather than by any deliberate plan. The smallest of the three pups, a sturdy little girl with her mother's dark fur, refused to settle for anyone but Ren whenever she grew fussy, and would quiet almost instantly the moment Ren lifted her, tucking herself against Ren's shoulder with a small, satisfied sound that never failed to bring a soft smile to Ren's face. "She knows you," Freya said one morning, watching the scene with quiet warmth. "Whatever happened before, whatever your mind can't remember, some part of her recognizes the woman who kept her alive in that storm. I don't think that kind of bond simply disappears." Ren looked down at the pup dozing peacefully against her shoulder, and something in her expression carried a complicated mixture of joy and old, lingering grief. "I used to tell myself I couldn't get attached," she admitted quietly. "Back then, in that place. It hurt too much every time one of them was taken away, sold or traded to somewhere I could never follow. I taught myself to care just enough to comfort them, but never enough to break my own heart every single time." "And now?" Freya asked gently. Ren looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Now I don't seem to remember how to hold back at all," she said. I don't know if that's a good thing or a terrible one. It's a wonderful thing, Freya said firmly. It means whatever they tried to make you, you found your way back to the person you were always meant to be. Don't apologize for that. Not to me. Not to anyone. Cade witnessed more of these quiet moments than he ever admitted aloud, finding excuses to pass through the nursery wing more often than strictly necessary, drawn by something he no longer bothered denying to himself, even if he had not yet found the courage to name it plainly to anyone else. He watched Wren laugh softly at the pup's clumsy attempts to crawl, watched her patience when the smallest one cried through the night, watched the slow, steady way joy was returning to her face, even as the shadow of what waited beyond Frostmore's borders continued to grow darker with each passing day. The training yard, meanwhile, had become a place of constant, purposeful activity. Cade drilled his warriors harder than he had in years, running defensive formations along every possible approach to the lodge, reviewing border patrol routes with Gareth late into the night, and personally overseeing the reinforcement of the outer watchtowers that had, until recently, seemed more than sufficient for Frostmore's needs. Wren found herself drawn to these preparations as well, watching from the edge of the yard one crisp morning as warriors moved through combat drills with practiced precision. Cade noticed her there and crossed the yard once the drill concluded, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold air. "You don't have to watch this," he said, though not unkindly. "It isn't a pleasant thing to witness, preparing for a fight none of us wanted." "I want to help," Wren said, surprising him with the firmness in her voice. "I've been thinking about it for days now. I may not remember everything, but pieces keep surfacing, and some of what I remember could matter. The layout of Hollowfang's main compound, where the weaker points in their patrol routes are. Draven's habits, his temperament, the way he makes decisions when he feels threatened. I know these things, Cade, even if I can't explain exactly how I know them. Let me use that. Let me be useful for something other than sitting safely inside, while everyone else prepares to fight for me." Cade studied her for a long moment, torn between the protective instinct that wanted to keep her as far from this coming conflict as possible, and the growing respect he held for her strength, a strength that had only grown clearer with every difficult truth she had faced since waking in that storm. "All right," he said finally. "Come with me. Gareth will want to hear everything you remember, and so will I." That afternoon, in the map room deep within the lodge, Wren sat across from Cade and Gareth, a rough sketch of the Northern Territories spread across the table between them, and slowly, carefully, began filling in details that made Gareth's eyebrows rise higher with every passing minute. She described the compound's layout with surprising precision once she allowed the memories to surface rather than fighting them back. The main hall where Draven held court, the lower levels where the stolen young were kept, the eastern gate that saw far less patrol traffic than the others because Draven considered the steep terrain beyond it protection enough on its own. "He's proud," Wren said, her voice growing steadier the longer she spoke, as though giving voice to these memories was somehow loosening the wall around them rather than reinforcing it. "He believes his own reputation is enough to keep most threats away without needing to overextend his patrols. That pride could work against him if we understood exactly where to press." Gareth studied the notes he had been taking, with a slowly dawning look of respect. "This is more than we've managed to learn about Hollowfang's compound in years of careful scouting," he admitted. "Alpha, this changes our position considerably." Cade nodded slowly, though his attention remained fixed on Wren, on the quiet strength in her posture even as she described a place that had caused her so much suffering. "You didn't have to relive any of this," he said softly, once Gareth had stepped away to begin drafting updated defensive plans. "I know how much it must have cost you." "It cost less than I expected," Wren admitted, surprising herself with the realization, even as she said it aloud. Maybe because this time, remembering it means something. It isn't just pain resurfacing for no reason. It's pain finally being useful, finally being turned into something that might protect people I've come to care about. She looked up at him, something soft and searching in her expression. "I didn't expect to care about anyone this quickly. Not after everything. But I do, Cade. More than I know how to explain." Cade felt his chest tighten at her words, at the quiet vulnerability behind them, and he found himself reaching across the table to take her hand, without fully deciding to do so first. "I feel the same," he admitted, his voice low and rough with an honesty he rarely allowed himself. "I told myself, That first night, that I only wanted answers. That the pull I felt toward you was simply gratitude, or curiosity, or the natural concern any alpha would feel for someone who had risked everything for his family. But it has become something more than that, Ren, and I no longer see the use in pretending otherwise. Ren's breath caught softly, her fingers tightening around his. I don't know what kind of future someone like me can offer anyone, she whispered. I came from nothing. I remember almost none of my own life before 3 nights ago. I carry marks on my skin from a place that used me as a tool for years. What could I possibly offer a pack, an alpha, that isn't already broken beyond repair? You already offered this pack everything that matters, Cade said firmly. 3 lives that would otherwise be lost. Courage that put every warrior in this hall to shame. And a heart, Ren, that survived years of cruelty without losing its capacity for kindness. That is not broken. That is the strongest thing I have ever witnessed in another living being. He reached up, gently, to brush a strand of hair back from her face, his touch careful, almost reverent. Whatever comes next, whatever Draven Voss brings to our door, I do not intend to face it without you standing beside me. Not because I need your knowledge of his compound, though that helps a great deal, because I do not want to face any of it without you at all. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the space between them charged with something neither had fully acknowledged until now. Ren's eyes searched his, uncertain and hopeful all at once, and Cade found himself leaning slowly closer, drawn by a pull he no longer had any interest in resisting. The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway outside broke the moment before it could fully complete itself, and both of them pulled back, faces flushed, as one of the younger warriors burst into the map room, breathless and wide-eyed. Alpha! The young wolf gasped. Watchtower, reports lights on the northern ridge. Torches, moving in formation. Whoever it is, they're not trying to hide their approach. Cade was on his feet instantly, every trace of the softness from moments before replaced by sharp, focused alertness. How many? Hard to say for certain in the dark, the warrior said. But enough to be a formal envoy, not a scouting party. Gareth is already gathering warriors at the main gate. Cade turned back to Ren, whose face had gone pale again, old fear flickering behind her eyes at the mention of torches on the northern ridge. Stay here, he said gently but firmly. Please, whatever this is, I need to know you're safe while I deal with it. Ren nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the maps and notes they had been working on. Be careful, she whispered. Whatever Draven wants, he does not send envoys out of kindness. He sends them when he believes he holds the advantage. Cade held her gaze for one more long moment, memorizing the fear and the fierce determination both written across her face, before turning and striding quickly out into the cold night air, toward whatever message Hollow Fang had traveled through the dark to deliver. By the time Cade reached the main gate, a full line of Frostmoor warriors had already formed a defensive wall across the entrance, torches raised against the darkness, breath fogging in the cold night air. Beyond the gate, at a respectful but deliberate distance, stood a small group of Hollow Fang wolves, no more than 6 in number, their leader stepping forward the moment Cade appeared. He was an older wolf, gray at the temples, dressed in dark furs marked with the same broken circle symbol Cade had seen carved into the pine tree days before. His posture carried the particular arrogance of someone accustomed to speaking with authority he had not personally earned, but borrowed entirely from someone else's power. Alpha Ashworth, the envoy said, inclining his head just enough to avoid outright disrespect, while making clear he considered the gesture more formality than genuine deference. I come on behalf of Alpha Draven Voss of Hollow Fang. State your business, Cade said, his voice carrying easily across the cold distance, cold and even, despite the fury simmering just beneath the surface. Word has reached my Alpha, the envoy continued, that Frostmoor harbors a woman who once served Hollow Fang. A woman who fled during recent chaos, taking with her property that did not belong to her. His eyes flicked briefly toward the lodge behind Cade, as though he could see through its walls, to the pups sleeping safely within. Alpha Voss is a reasonable man. He is prepared to overlook this unfortunate misunderstanding, provided the woman is returned to Hollow Fang immediately, along with appropriate compensation for the trouble her disappearance has caused. A low growl rippled through the assembled Frostmoor warriors at the word property, and Cade felt his own control require real effort to maintain. "The woman you speak of is not property," Cade said, his voice dropping into something dangerously calm. "She is a guest of this pack, under my direct protection. As for the pups you refer to so carefully as trouble, they are my own sister's children, stolen from their mother's den, in a raid your Alpha ordered. There is no misunderstanding here. There is only a crime, committed against my family, and I have no intention of returning either the woman who saved them or the children themselves to the pack responsible for taking them in the first place." The envoy's composed expression flickered slightly, though he recovered quickly. "Alpha Voss anticipated this response," he said. "He asked me to remind you that Hollowfang does not forget what it considers its own, and that pursuing this path will not end favorably for Frostmoor. He is prepared to offer generous terms in exchange for peaceful cooperation. He would be far less generous should this matter require a different kind of resolution." "Are you threatening my pack?" Cade asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that made even the warriors flanking him shift uneasily. "I am delivering a message," the envoy said carefully. "What you choose to call it is entirely your own decision." Cade stepped forward until he stood directly at the gate, close enough now that the envoy could not mistake the intensity in his eyes. "Then deliver this message back to your Alpha," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every wolf present, both Frostmoor and Hollowfang alike. "Tell Draven Voss that Frostmoor does not surrender what belongs under its protection. Tell him that the woman he calls property is a survivor of years of cruelty at his hands, and that every wolf standing behind me tonight would rather fight to the last breath than hand her back to the man who broke her memory trying to control her spirit. Tell him that if he wants a war over 3 innocent pups and 1 brave woman, Frostmoor will give him exactly that, and he will not enjoy the outcome nearly as much as he imagines." Silence stretched across the cold distance between the two groups, broken only by the crackling of torches and the distant howl of wind moving through the pines. The envoy's composed mask slipped further, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "You understand what you are choosing," he said finally. "Hollowfang has not lost a conflict in over a decade. My Alpha commands warriors far more numerous than the pack you lead here in these quiet mountains. Numbers alone do not win every fight," Cade said evenly. "Cruelty breeds fear, not loyalty, and fear is a poor foundation for warriors who must trust each other completely in battle. My pack fights for family, for each other, for a woman who has already proven her courage beyond question. I would put that kind of loyalty against your numbers any day, and I suspect, when the moment truly comes, you will find I am right to do so." The envoy studied him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before he inclined his head once more, this time with slightly more genuine respect than before. "I will deliver your response exactly as spoken," he said, "though I would advise you to prepare your borders carefully, Alpha Ashworth. My Alpha does not accept refusal gracefully, and he has already begun moving warriors into position along the northern approaches, in anticipation of exactly this outcome." Without another word, the envoy turned and led his small group back into the darkness beyond the ridge, torches bobbing away into the night until they disappeared entirely from view. Cade remained at the gate for a long while after they vanished, staring into the darkness where the enemy had retreated, his mind already working through every defensive measure his pack would need in the days ahead. Gareth approached quietly, his expression grim. "That went about as well as could be expected," he said, "which is to say, not well at all." "He wasn't looking for peaceful resolution," Cade said. "That message was a formality. Draven Voss made his decision the moment he learned Ren survived and reached our territory. This was never going to end without conflict." "Then we prepare fully," Gareth said. "I'll gather the council tonight. We need every warrior briefed, every border reinforced, every possible approach accounted for, before Hollowfang decides the time for messages has passed." Cade nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on the dark northern ridge for a long moment longer, a heavy weight settling over his chest. War with Hollowfang would cost lives, possibly many, and no amount of preparation could entirely erase that grim reality. But the alternative, surrendering Ren and the pups back into the hands of a man who saw children as trade goods and a traumatized survivor as reclaimable property, was not something Cade Ashworth would ever allow, regardless of the cost required to prevent it. He found Ren waiting just inside the lodge entrance when he finally returned from the gate, her face pale but composed, having clearly heard enough of the confrontation through the walls to understand exactly what had transpired. "He wants me back," she said quietly, not quite a question. "He wants to reclaim what he considers his," Cade said, closing the distance between them. "But you belong to no one but yourself, Ren. That was true before tonight, and it remains true now, regardless of what threats Draven Voss chooses to make." "This is my fault," Ren whispered, her composure finally beginning to crack. "Whatever happens now, whoever gets hurt defending this pack, it will be because of me, because I ran, because I brought this danger to your door." Cade took her face gently between his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You brought 3 innocent lives to safety," he said firmly. "You brought courage into a place that already valued it, and you brought yourself, a woman worth defending regardless of any cost. Whatever comes next is Draven Voss's doing, not yours. He is the one who chose cruelty. He is the one who chose to hunt a woman who only ever wanted to save children from the fate he tried to force upon her. Do not carry guilt for his choices, Ren. Carry only the truth of your own courage, because that is the only thing in this entire conflict that has been unquestionably right from the very beginning." Ren's eyes filled with tears, though something in her expression steadied under the weight of his conviction. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I want you to know that meeting this pack, has given me more in a handful of days than years of my remembered and unremembered life ever did before. Whatever the cost of that, I don't regret a single moment of it." Cade pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, holding her close for a long moment in the quiet warmth of the entrance hall, while outside, the mountain wind carried the first distant whispers of the storm that was, this time, entirely of Draven Voss's making. The days that followed passed in a blur of urgent preparation. Warriors trained from dawn until well past dark. Border watches doubled, then tripled. Every approach to Frostmour's territory marked and monitored with a vigilance the pack had not exercised in a generation. Ren continued providing whatever fragments of memory proved useful, working closely with Gareth and the senior warriors to map every weakness she could recall in Hollow Fang's usual tactics and formations. And through it all, Cade found himself drawing strength from her presence, in a way he had never expected to need from anyone. Her quiet resolve steadying him through the long, exhausting hours of preparation for a conflict that both of them knew, with growing certainty, was no longer a question of if, but only a question of when. On the 7th night since the envoy's visit, with the whole pack exhausted from days of relentless preparation, Ren asked Cade if they could speak somewhere quiet, away from the constant activity of the training yard and the map room. He led her to a small room near the top of the lodge, a place with a wide window overlooking the moonlit mountains, and settled into the chair across from her, sensing that whatever she needed to say had been building inside her for some time. "I want to tell you everything," Ren said, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the window rather than on him, as though it were easier to speak the truth while looking somewhere else entirely. "Not fragments. Not pieces I've had to force into place. I think I remember enough now to tell the whole story, and I think you deserve to hear it before whatever happens next between our packs." Cade nodded, keeping his voice gentle. "Take whatever time you need." Ren took a slow breath, and when she began speaking, her voice carried a steadiness that suggested she had been rehearsing these words in her own mind for days, preparing herself for the moment she would finally have the courage to release them. "I was 6 years old when Hollow Fang took me," she said. "My family lived in a small human settlement near the edge of shifter territory, close enough that occasional trade happened between our village and the packs nearby, though we mostly kept to ourselves. I don't remember much of that life clearly, only fragments. My mother's voice, the smell of bread baking, a dog that used to follow me everywhere. I don't know exactly why Hollow Fang raided our settlement that night. I've since learned Draven's father, the Alpha before him, believed keeping a few human children among his ranks made useful, disposable hands for tasks his own wolves considered beneath them. Caring for stolen young was one such task. I was chosen for it because I was gentle with animals, even as a small child, and gentleness was apparently a useful trait to exploit." Cade's jaw tightened, fury building steadily beneath his controlled exterior, but he said nothing, letting her continue at her own pace. "They raised me within the compound," Ren went on, "not cruelly, not exactly, not in ways that would have drawn outside attention or interfered with my usefulness. I was fed, I was sheltered. I was taught to read simple instructions so I could follow feeding schedules and medical notes for the young ones kept in the lower levels. But I was never allowed outside the compound walls, never allowed to speak with anyone beyond the small circle of caretakers and guards who oversaw my work. And every single pup, every stolen young thing I grew to care for during those years, eventually disappeared, sold, traded. Sometimes, when negotiations failed, simply removed and never spoken of again. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and she paused, pressing her hands together tightly before continuing. I learned, very young, that loving them too openly only made the losing worse. So I built a wall, the same way you might build a wall around anything too painful to face directly. I told myself I was simply doing my duty, feeding them, cleaning them, singing them to sleep when they cried in the dark, and that whatever happened to them afterward was beyond my control, beyond my responsibility. I told myself that for years, Cade. I told myself that so thoroughly I nearly believed it. What changed? Cade asked softly, though he suspected he already knew part of the answer. Ren's eyes finally moved from the window to meet his, bright with unshed tears. Draven Voss became Alpha 5 years ago, after his father passed leadership to him, she said. He was worse, colder, more willing to use the stolen young for purposes his father had at least occasionally hesitated over. Ransom, intimidation, sometimes worse things I still can't bring myself to describe in detail. He also began watching me more closely as I grew older, deciding I had become useful enough, valuable enough to his operations, that I should be kept even closer under his personal authority, rather than left to the ordinary caretaking staff. Her hands trembled slightly, and Cade fought the urge to reach for them, sensing she needed to finish this without interruption. He never touched me the way you might fear, she said quietly, seeming to understand the direction of his silent worry. But he owned me, in every other sense a person can own another. My movements, my choices, my entire existence revolved around his approval, his needs, his moods. I lived in fear so constant it became simply the air I breathed, until I could barely remember what it felt like to exist without it. And then came the raid, Cade said quietly. Ren nodded. 3 infant pups, taken during a raid on a rival territory. Draven had been planning for weeks. I didn't know, at the time, that they belonged to your sister, to your pack. I only knew that they arrived terrified, barely settled, and that something about caring for them felt different from every other stolen young thing I had tended before. She paused, searching for the right words. Maybe it was simply exhaustion, years of buried grief, finally reaching a breaking point I couldn't control any longer. Maybe some part of me recognized, holding them, that I could not survive watching 3 more lives disappear into whatever fate Draven intended for them. Whatever the reason, when chaos erupted during a dispute among Draven's own lieutenants that same night, a fight over territory rights that had nothing at all to do with the pups, I saw an opening in the confusion, and for the first time in over 15 years of captivity, I acted entirely on my own will, rather than following anyone else's orders. You ran, Cade said softly. I ran, Ren confirmed, tears finally spilling freely down her face. I took the pups, and I ran, straight into a storm that most people would have called suicide to enter. I didn't care. I had spent 15 years watching young lives disappear one after another, powerless to stop any of it. And in that single desperate moment, I decided I would rather die trying to save 3 of them than survive another single day inside those walls, complicit in whatever came next. I don't remember much of the run itself, beyond the cold and the fear and the absolute certainty that stopping meant failing them completely. The rest, you already know. You found us. You saved what I could not have saved alone. Silence settled over the room for a long moment, heavy with the weight of everything Ren had finally released. Cade rose slowly and crossed to kneel in front of her chair, taking her trembling hands gently in his own. 15 years, he said quietly, his voice thick with barely restrained fury and profound aching respect all tangled together. 15 years of captivity, of watching cruelty you had no power to stop, and still, when the moment finally came, you chose courage over survival. Ren, I have led warriors into battle. I have watched grown wolves falter under far less pressure than you carried for over a decade. What you did that night was not simply brave. It was extraordinary. I don't feel extraordinary, Ren whispered. I feel broken. I feel like every choice I ever made before that night was a failure. Every pup I couldn't save a debt I can never repay. Then let this be part of your answer, Cade said firmly. Not just running that night, but everything after. Helping Freya's pups thrive. Sharing your memories to protect this pack, even though it cost you real pain to relive them. Standing here now, telling me the whole truth, even though it clearly terrifies you to do so. That is not a broken person, Ren. That is someone rebuilding herself, piece by piece, out of the very ruins someone else tried to bury her beneath. Ren's breath caught on a sob, and she leaned forward until her forehead rested against his shoulder, his arms coming up instinctively to hold her steady. They remained like that for a long while, the moonlight through the window casting soft silver light across the room, the distant sounds of the training yard finally quiet for the night. Draven will not stop, Ren said eventually, her voice muffled slightly against his shoulder. Not because he cares about me personally, not in any way that resembles real feeling, but because my escape proves something he cannot allow his own pack to believe, that his control is not absolute, that even those he raised from childhood can find the courage to defy him. He needs to make an example of what happens when someone tries. If he doesn't, he risks losing the fear that keeps his entire structure of power intact. Then we take that fear away from him entirely, Cade said, pulling back slightly to meet her eyes. We don't just defend against him, Ren. We end whatever hold he still believes he has over you, permanently, so thoroughly that no threat he makes ever carries real weight again. How? Ren asked, searching his face. By winning, Cade said simply. By proving, beyond any doubt, that the woman he tried to control now stands protected by a pack strong enough and loyal enough to make certain he never touches her again. Fear only holds power, as long as it goes unchallenged. We are about to challenge it completely. Ren studied him for a long moment, something steadying in her expression despite the exhaustion of everything she had just relived. I believe you, she said quietly. I don't know if I've ever truly believed anyone before in my life, not the way I believe you right now. Cade reached up, brushing a tear gently from her cheek. Then let that belief carry you through whatever comes next, he said softly. Because I intend to prove myself worthy of it, every single day, for as long as you'll allow me to try. Outside, the moon climbed higher over the silent mountains, and somewhere beyond the northern ridge, Hollow Fang's warriors continued gathering in the dark, preparing for a confrontation that would decide far more than the fate of one woman and 3 pups. It would decide whether cruelty and control could truly be outrun, or whether some debts of the past always eventually demanded to be settled in full. Cade held Ren close until her breathing finally steadied and exhaustion pulled her into a rare, peaceful sleep, and he made himself a private vow in the quiet dark of that room, one he intended to keep no matter what price the coming days demanded of him. In the days that followed her confession, something settled more firmly into place between Cade and Ren, a quiet understanding that neither of them needed to rush toward words or promises they were not yet ready to make, but that also neither of them wished to deny any longer. They found small moments together amid the constant preparation, a shared meal late in the evening, a quiet walk along the inner courtyard when the training yard finally emptied for the night, a hand reaching for another without either of them quite deciding to initiate the gesture first. Freya noticed, of course, as did most of the pack, though no one spoke of it directly, sensing perhaps that whatever was growing between their alpha and the woman who had saved his family deserved space to develop without the pressure of outside expectation weighing upon it. Ivy, ever practical despite her gentler nature, finally addressed it plainly one afternoon, while treating a minor training injury on Cade's forearm. You look at her, the way your father looked at your mother, she said, not glancing up from her work. I haven't seen that particular expression on your face in all the years I've known you, Cade Ashworth. Cade said nothing for a long moment, watching her work with careful, practiced hands. Is it foolish, he asked finally, to feel this deeply about someone after so short a time, in the middle of preparing for a war that might cost either of us everything? Ivy considered the question seriously before answering. I have watched this pack face difficult times before, she said. War tends to clarify things that peace allows people to avoid facing honestly. Perhaps it is not foolish at all. Perhaps it is simply honest, in a way that calmer times might have taken years to produce instead. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant orange and violet streaks across the western peaks, Cade found Ren in the training yard, watching quietly as younger pack members practiced basic defensive movements under an instructor's careful supervision. She had asked, days before, to learn some measure of self-defense herself, unwilling to remain entirely helpless should the coming conflict ever reach close enough to threaten her directly, and Cade had readily agreed, arranging for one of his most patient warriors to begin teaching her basic techniques. "How is the training progressing?" he asked, settling beside her on the low wooden bench at the yard's edge. "Slowly," Ren admitted, a faint, wry smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "I don't think I'll ever match the skill of anyone born to this life. But I feel less helpless than I did a week ago, and that matters more to me than I expected it would." "You were never helpless," Cade said. "Not for one moment since I found you in that snow. But I understand wanting to feel capable of protecting yourself, rather than relying entirely on others to do it for you." Ren turned to look at him, the fading light catching gold and amber in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding that, for never once making me feel like a burden, even with everything my presence has brought to your door." "You are not a burden," Cade said firmly, reaching over to take her hand in his own. "You are the reason 3 innocent lives are alive today. You are the reason this pack has learned more about our enemy in a matter of weeks than years of careful scouting ever managed to uncover. And you are," he added, his voice softening further, "the reason I find myself looking forward to each new day in a way I had genuinely forgotten was possible, before I pulled you out of that storm." Ren's breath caught softly, her fingers tightening around his. "Cade," she whispered, "whatever happens in the days ahead, I want you to know something. I have spent most of my remembered life believing I existed only to serve someone else's purposes, to be useful in whatever way circumstance demanded, and nothing more. Being here, with you, with Freya's pups, with this entire pack that has shown me more genuine kindness in a matter of weeks than I received in 15 years before it, it has taught me that I am allowed to want something for myself. And what I want, more than anything else I can currently name, is this, is you. Is a future where I get to choose my own path for the very first time in my life, and where that path leads toward you." Cade felt something in his chest swell with an emotion so profound it nearly stole his breath entirely. He reached up, gently cupping her face in his palm, and this time, when he leaned forward, there was no interruption to stop him. He kissed her softly, carefully, as though she were something precious enough to shatter under too much force, and Ren melted into the kiss with a small, quiet sound of relief, as though she too had been waiting for this exact moment, without quite allowing herself to hope for it. When they finally parted, foreheads resting gently together, Cade spoke in a voice rough with emotion. "Whatever comes in the days ahead," he said, "whatever Draven Voss brings to our door, know this. You are not simply under my protection, Ren. You are becoming the most important part of my life, and I intend to fight for that future with everything I have. Then we fight for it together," Ren said softly, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and something fiercer underneath them now, a resolve that had not existed in her when Cade first found her half frozen in the snow. "Whatever it takes." That fragile peace lasted only 2 more days. On the 3rd morning, a horn sounded from the northern watchtower, 3 sharp blasts that every wolf in Frostmoor recognized immediately as the signal for imminent danger. Cade was already moving before the 3rd blast had fully faded, pulling on his gear with practiced speed, while warriors throughout the lodge scrambled into readiness around him. Gareth met him at the base of the watchtower, his expression grim. "Scouts report a large force moving down from the northern ridge," he said. "Too large to be another envoy. This is exactly what we've been preparing for, Alpha. Draven Voss has decided the time for messages is over." Cade's jaw tightened, every instinct in his body sharpening into the focused, the deadly calm that had carried him through every crisis his pack had faced during his years as Alpha. "How long until they reach our borders?" "An hour," Gareth said. "Perhaps less, if they're moving as quickly as the scouts suggest." Cade nodded once, turning immediately toward the practical matters of defense, giving rapid orders that sent warriors scattering to their assigned positions along the reinforced perimeter. Freya's pups were moved immediately to the deepest, most protected chamber within the lodge, guarded by 3 of the pack's most trusted elder warriors, wolves too experienced for frontline combat, but more than capable of defending a single doorway against any intrusion. Ren found Cade near the main gate as the final preparations fell into place, her face pale but composed, her earlier training evident in the steady way she carried herself despite the fear undoubtedly churning beneath the surface. "I want to help," she said immediately, before he could suggest otherwise. "Not on the front lines. I understand that isn't my place given my training, but somewhere useful. Tending wounded, relaying messages, whatever this pack needs from me." Cade studied her for a long moment, torn between the fierce desire to keep her locked safely away from any possible danger, and the respect he held for her determination to stand and fight for the home and family she had come to love in such a short time. "Stay with Ivy," he said finally. "Help her prepare the healing hall for whatever wounded this fight produces. It is vital work, Ren, and it keeps you within the most protected part of the lodge, away from the worst of any fighting that reaches our walls." Ren nodded, accepting the compromise without argument, though her eyes carried a fierce determination that told Cade she would do far more than simply wait passively if the situation demanded otherwise. "Come back to me," she said softly, reaching up to press her palm against his chest, directly over his rapidly beating heart. "Whatever happens out there, come back to me, Cade Ashworth. I only just found the courage to want a future. I refuse to lose it before it has even properly begun." Cade covered her hand with his own, holding it firmly against his chest for one long, steadying moment. "I intend to keep every promise I have made you," he said quietly. "This war will end with Draven Voss's threat broken permanently, and I will be standing here afterward, exactly where I belong, beside you." He kissed her once more, brief but fierce, a promise sealed in the fading warmth of a peaceful morning, about to give way entirely to the chaos of battle. Then he turned, gathered his warriors with a sharp, commanding gesture, and moved to take his place at the front of Frostmour's defenses, ready to meet whatever storm Hollowfang was bringing down from the northern ridge. Behind him, Ren watched him go, her heart pounding with fear and fierce hope in equal measure, and she turned toward the healing hall with steady, determined steps, ready to do whatever was needed to help her new home survive the coming fight. The Hollowfang force appeared over the northern ridge just as the scouts had predicted, a dark mass moving down through the snow with grim, practiced discipline. Cade stood at the center of Frostmour's defensive line, Gareth at his right side, watching the approaching warriors with the same focused calm that had carried him through every difficult decision of his life as Alpha. Behind him, his own warriors held their positions along the reinforced perimeter, exactly as they had drilled for days, every approach covered, every weak point Ren had identified, now reinforced with additional watchers and fallback positions. Draven Voss himself led the approach, unmistakable even at a distance by the confident, arrogant set of his shoulders, and the dark, elaborate markings that distinguished an Alpha's status among his own kind. He stopped his force a short distance from Frostmour's outer line, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to maintain the illusion of restraint, even as his intentions remained plain to everyone watching. "Ashworth," Draven called, his voice carrying easily across the cold, still air. "I gave you a chance to resolve this peacefully. You chose otherwise. Understand that whatever follows now rests entirely on your own poor judgment." "The only poor judgment here," Cade called back, his voice equally clear and carrying, "was believing that stolen children and a traumatized survivor of your cruelty were yours to reclaim in the first place. Turn your warriors back now, Voss, and this ends without further conflict. Press forward, and you will learn exactly how far Frostmour is willing to go to protect what is under our care." Draven's expression twisted with cold fury at the accusation, though he recovered his composure quickly. "Brave words," he said, "for a pack so vastly outnumbered." "Numbers are not the only measure of strength," Cade replied evenly. "You are about to learn that lesson firsthand." Without further exchange, Draven raised his hand, and his warriors surged forward in a coordinated rush that Frostmour's defenders met with equally practiced discipline. The initial clash was fierce and chaotic, warriors from both sides meeting along the reinforced perimeter in a swirling contest of speed and strength, but Frostmour held its ground with a cohesion that clearly surprised the attacking force. Every position Ren had identified as a potential weakness had been reinforced days in advance. Every predictable tactic Draven's warriors attempted met with a counter that Frostmour's defenders had already rehearsed. Cade fought at the center of his line, his movements sharp and controlled, years of experience and responsibility guiding every decision, even in the heat of active conflict. He kept careful track of his warriors' positions, calling adjustments when needed, watching for any sign that Hollow Fang's numbers might begin overwhelming Frostmore's carefully prepared defenses. Inside the lodge, Ren worked alongside Ivy in the healing hall, tending to the first wounded warriors brought back from the perimeter, with steady, focused hands, despite the fear tightening her chest with every passing minute. She had insisted on being useful, and useful she remained, cleaning wounds, preparing bandages, offering calm words to frightened young warriors experiencing their first real conflict, drawing on some deep well of steadiness that 15 years of quiet suffering had, ironically, prepared her well to access. A young warrior named Elias, barely older than the pups he had helped defend, was carried in with a deep gash along his side, his face pale with pain and fear. Ren knelt beside him immediately, pressing clean cloth firmly against the wound, while Ivy worked quickly to assess the damage. "You're going to be all right," Ren said firmly, holding his gaze steady, even as her own hands trembled slightly with the effort of applying pressure. "Breathe with me. In and out, slow and steady. You did well out there. You're safe now." Elias's breathing gradually steadied under her calm, insistent guidance, and Ivy managed to close the wound with practiced skill, murmuring quiet thanks to Ren for keeping the young warrior calm enough to be treated properly. More wounded arrived steadily throughout the following hours, and Ren remained at the center of the healing effort the entire time, never once flinching from the difficult work despite the fear that never fully left her chest. Outside, the battle raged on with brutal intensity, Frostmore's disciplined defense gradually beginning to turn the tide against Hollow Fang's larger but less cohesive force. Gareth fought at Cade's side throughout, the two of them anticipating each other's movements with the ease of decades of shared history, cutting through the chaos with coordinated precision that steadily wore down the attacking force's initial momentum. It was nearly 2 hours into the conflict when Draven Voss himself finally moved to engage Cade directly, apparently recognizing that his warriors were failing to break Frostmore's defense, and deciding that ending the fight by removing its leader offered his best remaining chance at victory. The confrontation between the two alphas was fierce, both experienced fighters testing each other with careful, calculated movements, before the fighting intensified into something faster and more desperate. Draven fought with the confidence of a man accustomed to winning through sheer dominance and intimidation, but Cade fought with something Draven had never needed to develop in all his years of cruel authority: the steady, unshakable purpose of a man defending everything and everyone he had come to love. The fight carried them across the churned, trampled snow of the battlefield, each exchange testing the other's endurance and skill, until a moment came when Draven, growing frustrated by his inability to break through Cade's defense, made a reckless, overextended move that Cade had been patiently waiting for throughout the entire exchange. Cade seized the opening decisively, and within moments, Draven Voss found himself disarmed and pinned, the fight finally, definitively over. "Yield," Cade said, his voice low and hard. "And this ends now, with your own life spared despite everything you have done. Continue, and I promise you that mercy expires immediately." Draven, breathing hard, humiliation and fury warring visibly across his face, remained silent for a long, tense moment, before finally, grudgingly, offering the signal of surrender that every wolf on the battlefield recognized instantly. Word spread rapidly through both forces, and the fighting gradually ground to a halt, Hollow Fang's remaining warriors lowering their weapons as their alpha's defeat became undeniable. Cade stood over his fallen enemy, chest heaving with exertion, and felt the weight of the entire conflict finally begin to lift from his shoulders. "This ends today," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the now quiet battlefield, addressing both his own warriors and the defeated Hollow Fang forces alike. Draven Voss's claim over Ren, and over any stolen young held within his compound, ends permanently, effective immediately. Any Hollow Fang wolf who wishes to leave that cruelty behind is welcome to seek shelter and honest purpose elsewhere, Frostmore included, should they prove their sincerity. But the practice of stealing children and trading traumatized survivors like property ends here, today, or Draven Voss will find that this defeat was merely the beginning of what awaits him, should he ever attempt such cruelty again. A murmur of surprised approval moved through some of the assembled Hollow Fang warriors, several of whom, Cade noted with interest, seemed less than devastated by their alpha's public humiliation and defeat. Perhaps Wren had been right, all along, about the fragile nature of fear-based loyalty, and the cracks that formed the moment such control was genuinely challenged. Gareth approached, breathing hard but otherwise unharmed, relief evident in his exhausted expression. "It's over," he said simply. "We held." Frostmore held. Cade nodded, though his gaze had already turned back toward the lodge, toward the healing hall, where he knew Wren had spent the entire battle tending to Frostmore's wounded. "Secure the prisoners," he instructed. "Treat their wounded alongside our own. Whatever cruelty Draven Voss practiced, Frostmore does not answer cruelty with cruelty in return." Leaving Gareth to oversee the aftermath, Cade made his way back toward the lodge as quickly as his exhausted body would allow, driven by an urgent need to see with his own eyes that Wren remained safe throughout the chaos of the past hours. He found her in the healing hall exactly where he expected, her hands and clothing marked with the evidence of hours of difficult work, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes lighting immediately with fierce relief the moment she caught sight of him standing in the doorway. "Cade," she breathed, crossing the room quickly to reach him, her hands moving over his chest and arms in a rapid, searching check for injury. "You're hurt." "Nothing serious," Cade assured her, catching her searching hands gently in his own and holding them still. "It's over, Wren. Draven Voss is defeated. His threat against you, against this pack, ends today." Wren's composure finally broke entirely, tears spilling freely down her face, as relief overwhelmed the fear she had carried throughout every long hour of the battle. Cade pulled her close, holding her tightly against his chest despite his own exhaustion, both of them simply breathing together for a long moment amid the quiet aftermath of everything they had fought so hard to protect. "I told you I would come back to you," Cade murmured softly into her hair. "I intend to keep every promise I make you, Wren. Especially this one." Around them, the healing hall continued its steady, exhausted work. Wounded warriors from both sides receiving careful treatment side by side, the first fragile threads of a very different future beginning to weave themselves quietly into place amid the chaos of the battle's end. In the weeks that followed the battle, Frostmore slowly settled into a peace that felt, to everyone who had lived through the tense uncertainty of the preceding months, almost unfamiliar in its calm steadiness. Draven Voss, stripped of his authority through a formal council of neighboring pack leaders convened once word of his crimes spread beyond Hollowfang's own borders, was exiled from leadership entirely, his territory placed under the careful oversight of Hollowfang's own senior warriors, several of whom, it turned out, had grown deeply weary of their former alpha's cruelty, and welcomed the chance to rebuild their pack around fairer, more honest principles. The stolen young still held within Hollowfang's compound were located and returned to their families, a slow, careful process that Wren herself insisted on helping to oversee, drawing on knowledge of the compound's layout that had once caused her such pain to remember, and now, finally, served a purpose worthy of everything she had survived. Each reunion she witnessed, each frightened young pup finally returned to a mother or father who had feared them lost forever, seemed to close some small piece of the old wound Draven Voss had carved into her over 15 long years, replacing grief with something that finally resembled genuine peace. Freya's pups, meanwhile, thrived in the safety of Frostmore's care, growing stronger and more curious with each passing week. The smallest of the three, the little girl who had bonded so fiercely with Wren from her very first night of rescue, took her first wobbling steps one bright, cold morning in the courtyard, watched by nearly the entire pack, who had gathered, half by accident and half by the kind of warm affection that made Frostmore feel less like a simple settlement and more like an enormous, interconnected family. Wren knelt at the far end of the courtyard, arms outstretched, laughing with pure delight as the small pup toddled unsteadily across the packed snow toward her, tumbling the final few steps directly into her waiting embrace. The pack erupted into cheers and warm laughter, and Cade, watching from the edge of the gathering, felt something settle deep and permanent in his chest at the sight, a certainty he had been building toward for weeks, finally solidifying into absolute conviction. That evening, once the pups had been settled for the night, and the pack had gathered in the great hall for the evening meal, Cade rose from his place at the head of the table, and the room gradually quieted, as every wolf present sensed that their alpha intended to speak on a matter of real importance. "Many of you remember the night I found a stranger buried in the snow," Carrying 3 impossible miracles against her own failing heartbeat, Cade began, his eyes finding Wren's across the room, warmth and certainty evident in every word. In the months since, that stranger has become far more than a guest under this pack's protection. She has proven her courage in ways few among us could match. She has shared painful truths that helped protect every single warrior who stood against Hollow Fang's threat. She has cared for our young with a gentleness that speaks to the very best of what this pack values most deeply. And somewhere along the way, without either of us quite planning for it, she became the person I cannot imagine building any future without. A soft murmur of warm anticipation moved through the gathered pack, many faces already breaking into knowing smiles. Cade crossed the hall to where Wren sat, her cheeks flushing with surprised emotion, as she realized exactly what was unfolding, and knelt before her, taking her hands gently in his own. "Wren," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent hall, "I have led this pack for many years, and in that time I have made a great many promises out of duty and responsibility. This promise is different. I do not offer it because I am your alpha, or because you saved my family, though both of those things matter to me more than words can properly express. I offer it because somewhere in the space of these past months, you have become the truest home I have ever known. Will you stand beside me, not simply as a guest under this pack's protection, but as my mate, as protector of our young alongside me, and as the partner I intend to build the rest of my life around?" Wren's eyes filled with tears, joy and disbelief, and overwhelming love, all tangled together as she looked down at him, at the man who had pulled her from a freezing grave, and given her, in return, an entirely new life worth living. "Yes," she whispered, then repeated it louder, clearer, so that every wolf in the hall could hear the certainty behind it. "Yes, Cade Ashworth, there is nothing in this world or any other. I want more than that future, beside you." The hall erupted into joyful celebration, warriors and elders alike, rising to their feet in genuine, heartfelt cheers, and Cade rose to pull Wren into his arms, kissing her soundly amid the warm chaos of the pack's approval. Freya, watching from nearby with her 3 pups gathered close, wept openly with happiness, understanding perhaps better than anyone present exactly how much this moment represented. Not simply a joining of 2 hearts, but the final, complete healing of a wound that had begun the night her own children were stolen from her arms. Later that night, once the celebration had finally quieted and the pack had drifted off toward well-earned rest, Cade and Wren stood together near the same window where she had first told him her entire painful history, looking out over the moonlit mountains that had once seemed so full of danger, and now felt, simply, like home. "Do you remember?" Wren asked softly, leaning against his side, "the night you found me? I still don't remember much of it myself, beyond the cold, and the certainty that I had to protect them, no matter the cost. But I've thought about it so many times since, trying to imagine what it must have looked like from where you stood." "I remember every detail," Cade said quietly, wrapping his arm more securely around her shoulders. "The storm was the worst I had seen in years. I nearly turned back more than once, certain that nothing could have survived out there. And then I found you, buried in the snow, with 3 lives tucked safely against your heart, and I understood immediately that I was looking at someone entirely extraordinary." He pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "I did not know, that night, how deeply my own life was about to change. I only knew that I could not walk away and leave you there. I am endlessly grateful, every single day since. That instinct proved to be exactly right." Wren tilted her face up to meet his eyes. Warmth and complete contentment settled finally, permanently, into every line of her expression. "You saved my life that night," she said softly, "but you gave me so much more than survival, Cade. You gave me a family, a purpose, a future I never once dared to imagine for myself. During all those years, locked away in Hollow Fang's compound, whatever I did to deserve finding you in that storm, I will spend the rest of my life grateful for it." "You deserved it simply by being exactly who you are," Cade said firmly. "A woman brave enough to choose kindness, even when the cost nearly killed her. That kind of heart deserves every good thing life has left to offer, Wren. I intend to spend the rest of my own life making certain you receive it." Outside, snow began falling softly once more, over Frostmore's peaceful mountains, gentle and quiet, nothing at all like the fierce, deadly storm that had first brought them together. Inside, warm and safe within the walls of the home she had once nearly died protecting, Wren rested her head against Cade's shoulder, and for the first time in longer than her broken memory could properly measure, felt entirely, completely, at peace. 3 pups slept soundly nearby, safe and thriving, their small lives forever woven into the story of the woman who had carried them through the worst night of their young existence, and the Alpha King, who had found her, half frozen and utterly extraordinary, waiting in the snow.